Rick Perry, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, leading by on an average of about 12 points in 3 different polls, crushing Mitt Romney right out of the gate, the first poll that they have now that he's in the race. So my question is, can Rick Perry actually win the presidency? And that is a hell of a question, because I think that there's some chance. Jimmy.
You know, he stands out as a dumbass in a field that includes Gingrich, Santorum, Kaine, and Bachmann. And he's the longest currently serving governor in America. So yes, of course he can be elected.
Yeah. And look, the guy, to me, he looks like Josh Brolin playing George Bush in the movie W.
Wow, he does.
Nice, yeah. Right?
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, really, we're going to go back in that direction? But on the other hand, Michael, I think there are 3 Republicans who can win. I think Romney, I think Perry, and I think Huckabee if he gets back into the race. Yeah. I think those are the only 3 that can win. Of course, I could be wrong.
Well, I think first of all, it shows the fluidity of this race. I mean, it just shows that they're not happy with who their candidates are. Somebody comes along, goes to the head of the pack. Of course, these are just polls we're relying on. George Pataki now deciding whether or not to run. Sarah Palin deciding whether or not to run. Of course, I still think that if Jeb Bush got into the race, he would win the nomination hands down. So I think that they're undecided, and they also can't figure out what their constituency is. If independent white males in the Midwest are the swing votes in this election, yeah, Mitt Romney has, I would think, a better shot of getting those voters than does Rick Perry, because he seems like a kook. But if the Republicans in other parts of the country already decide that that's going to be who it is, it's still going to be an uphill battle for Perry. I think. I just don't see him being able to win the presidency.
His campaign released a video of the idealized vision of America in the future. It was called Conan the Barbarian. So that's what we're going to do.
I thought you were going to go with Mad Max.
Oh. Right. Could go either way.
Okay. But so here's the thing, right? Obviously, he appeals to social conservatives, but at the same time, he appeals to economic conservatives. That's why I always thought that if he got in, he would be an incredibly formidable candidate. And he's got this record where he could turn around and say, look at all the jobs I created in Texas. Now, there's a lot of nuance to that, and it's not exactly right, but there's some truth to it, right? Yeah. So it's at least enough for a Republican to be able to say, oh my God, I did something good for a change. Can you believe it? I'm a Republican that created like 2.5 jobs. I'm the greatest Republican that ever existed, right?
In the state of Texas, which is very different. I mean, Michael Dukakis ran on the Massachusetts Miracle, and it was, up until then, what propelled his candidacy. In 1988, then he comes onto the scene, and they tear apart bit by bit what that miracle was. I think that there's something of that with what Perry has done in Texas.
I think it all depends. Rick Perry, can he be elected? It depends on if the media shows up and does even half a job. Now, they haven't. They're not probably gonna. But if they did, if the media shows up and shines a light on his real record, no, he can get torn apart worse than Michael Dukakis, because he's got to wait. In his book, he said that Social Security is unconstitutional, Medicare is unconstitutional, and we see what happened in New York when people say that stuff, right? So I think if the media, it all depends on if the media shows up, right?
To be fair, now I think the media has done a pretty decent job of showing a couple of these Rick Perry things in the beginning, and then I love his spokesperson to respond to all the charges of how crazy the book is. The book says the 16th Amendment is wrong. We shouldn't have any income tax at all. We should do this basically national sales tax that kills the poor and the middle class. Yeah. He lets the rich skate by. It's called a fair tax, which is so Orwellian. It's the exact opposite.
But it's also very Republic of Texan. I mean, that's what they talk about all the time there.
Right. But you know what? And so the response of the spokesperson was, oh, but that book was looking backwards, not forwards. That book was written a whole 9 months ago. Okay. Now, but a lot of that has come to light, I think. Maybe I'm just reading too many of the progressive websites, but that might be the case. But look, I think he's got a real shot here, but I think that there's some chance that at some point he blows himself up. Yeah. Like that he's going to, because he's just not quite bright enough, and he doesn't have a Rove like guy to grab him in a headlock and say, don't say that, don't say that, don't say that, say this, say this, say this, right? And without that kind of discipline, I think at some point he self-destructs.
I think that's a great point. I mean, he doesn't have the infrastructure that the Bushes gave to their son, so I think it's going to be very difficult for him to sustain. It's been, a few weeks that he's in the race. He goes to the head of a class that is not very impressive. He takes votes really away from nobody. He picks up all his votes from undecideds or people after the Ames straw poll who are just kind of looking for a candidate again. So I think that I wouldn't trust these numbers, and I certainly would not trust Rick Perry as my nominee if I were a Republican right now.
Yeah, and you know what? As bad a candidate as I think Obama is, I think that Rick Perry can't win the national. I think he can't win. I can't. But as I look at Obama, I go, "Oh my God, he's doing everything wrong."
See, we say that we always make fun of the current Republican presidential hopeful. Oh, they're so ignorant. They're pro-ignorance, and they're so doomed. They're anti-science. But who's the dummy? We elected Barack Obama, who rules as a Republican, and we're going to vote for him again.
Right. Well.
Who's playing to fear?
But that's the thing. My theory is that. I think that it's all driven by the money, of course, and so it's all incentives and disincentives. And if you get money from a certain direction, you're going to go in that direction. Generally speaking, it's an institutional corruption rather than a personal corruption, right? So so the system sets it up so that your only two choices are: well, you can go with Romney, who's a corporate robot, or you can go with Barack Obama. He's a little lighter corporate robot, or we'll give you a lunatic like Perry or Bachman that'll blow the whole place up, right? So go ahead and choose between the two corporate robots. And so I think that's where we're stuck, unfortunately.